Please join me in welcoming Lisa Gable.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, as you may have gathered from the very nice introduction, and it's so lovely to be with you all today, is that I'm not exactly a shrinking violet. I've flown in helicopters over the DMZ on the Korean Peninsula. I've flown into war zones, leaving an airport in a blackened out vehicle, surrounded by guys with submachine guns. But best of all, I've actually been on television in Japan with Big Bird, and I kept my dignity intact. But it wasn't always easy holding my own in what was very much of a man's world. Early and often, I was the odd girl out. I would find myself early in my career in rooms with career admirals and generals at the U.S. Army War College talking about national security with men who'd seen combat. So I want you to picture the beginning of my career. I worked at the Pentagon during the Cold War, it was during the Reagan era, and the seats were man-sized, not a lot of women there at that point in time. And my feet, they literally didn't touch the ground. 5 feet tall, 95 pounds, so I wear the high heels that I have on today, so I at least feel like I have a big presence. And not surprisingly, my nickname became Tinkerbell. And you know what the thing was? I embraced it, because my fairy dust was data and determination. But what I realized, and I realize it more the older that I get, is that I'm here today because of the individual action different people took to support me. A woman by the name of Helen Marie Taylor gave me a fully paid scholarship to Georgetown's Masters in National Security program. The classes were taught at the Pentagon at nighttime. I worked during the day. Classes were 85% men, and most of the men were in their 30s. I was 21. I went off to the White House and worked with a number of different people, but Elaine Chao was somebody that I met early in both of our careers, and she's just been such a huge personal advocate for me at all the transition points in my life. And I had the chance to meet a woman by the name of Barbara Barrett, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about her later in our conversation. But one reason I'm excited to talk to all of you today is that it's the intentional actions, as Barbara was saying, the intentional actions that each of you have taken to support another person that really changes the world, even in small ways that have big impact. Whenever I'm talking to a room full of people like yourselves who are donors, philanthropists, volunteers, board members, everybody wants to move their organization to the next level of performance. You want your community, your church, your synagogue, you want it to have impact, you want to have people engaged. But in order for you to realize your big dream, your big idea, you need to figure out, well, what went wrong in the past? And how am I going to change it? And ultimately, what I realized is it all comes down to people. Because guess what? People cause the problems, and you need people to fix the problems. And sometimes you need to recognize that it's small steps that are going to get you there. I always think of this quote from Desmond Tutu, which is that when you eat an elephant, you eat it one bite at a time. And so in my family, we developed a concept which is, what's your small bite of the day? And for me, especially when I'm overwhelmed and I'm anxious and I'm stressed, I write down 3 things that I'm going to do before the end of that day. They're not big things. So maybe I'll finish an expense report. I'll send out my URL to make sure that somebody considers me as a speaker. Or perhaps I will finally get my act together and take that box of gently worn clothes that's been sitting at the bottom of my closet for 6 months, which I've been meaning to take to the Salvation Army or Goodwill, and I'll finally just get in the car and take them there. But what happens is when I mark something off my mental list, my anxiety decreases, my stress decreases. And that's the way it is with the big ideas that you might be involved with. Perhaps people in this room are involved in climate change, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Maybe you're helping military veterans or women in democracy. No matter what it is, You're helping people bridge a stage in their life. And it comes down to what's going on with the people in the category that you're working with at that point in time in their lives. It's not always the same. And when people are worried, when they're having a difficult time, mentorship becomes this stabilizing force. And I want you to think about mentorship not as, you're standing on some mountain, handing out your sage advice and your words of wisdom. What you're doing is you're guaranteeing for people that you're committed to their career. You're committed to seeing them step forward. And as I said at the beginning, I was very fortunate in the mentors that I had. A couple by the name of Craig and Barbara Barrett really helped me through major transition points in the first 15 years of my career. So I want to tell you how I met them. I was working at the White House. I was in my early 20s. It was my dream job. It should be anybody's dream job. But what people fail to realize is that it's a building. It's an office building. And everybody has to do grunt work. It's not glamorous every day. So I get a phone call and was told, you need to take this woman. Her name's Barbara Barrett. She's going to be Deputy Administrator of the FAA, and she's got to be interviewed by Bob Tuttle, who's head of presidential personnel. So I want you to take Barbara over to the West Wing, wait with her until Bob's ready. Bob wasn't ready for 2 hours. 2 hours. So I'd been working on my master's thesis, going to classes at nighttime, going to classes during the during the weekends, and I was tired. I wasn't doing a lot of networking at that time. I was working. And we talked for 2 hours. 2 hours in this windowless room that was in this corner of a hallway. And if anybody's met Barbara, you know that she asked you a lot of questions, and the time went actually very quickly, and it changed my life. Barbara later became a board director for Raytheon. She was the U.S. ambassador to Finland. She was Secretary of the Air Force. And she introduced me to her husband, Craig, and so when I left the Reagan White House, I went to work for Craig, who would become CEO and Chairman of the Board of Intel Corporation. If I had not taken advantage of that being stuck in the basement, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be there. And if somebody hadn't invested their time in me, I wouldn't be here. As a mentor, I think one of the things that's really been bothering me a lot lately is that I want the people I'm working with, the people I'm helping, I want them to wake up knowing their passion. I want them excited every time they get up in the morning. I want them to know what their purpose is. I want to encourage them, open the doors so they can be wonderful and marvelous as I know they can be. But one of the things that I've discovered during the last couple of years is that we seem to have a problem where people's passion and purpose is waning. People are overwhelmed, they're stressed. Rates of loneliness are rising very high, rates of unhappiness are rising high. And we're all involved or live here in the Beltway, so we know in politics, sometimes our politicians talk about a problem as being too big to solve, or perhaps too big to fail. And you kind of throw up your hands and go, well, why should I try? Why should I try? But what I hope that you'll help me do is help people remember it's those little intentional actions that bridge the gap for someone during a difficult time. It's that nudging that you do, being a cheerleader, a door opener, giving them access to an opportunity they would not have had that makes all the difference in the world. And so it's all about relationships, right? It all comes down to relationships. And we saw relationships roll out in the most amazing way during the last 2 years. In August of 2021, a group that I work with called Refugee Relief International, it's made up of special operations, doctors and medics. And they go into war zones, they go into conflict zones, and they help people at that point in time in the worst locations. Well, when Afghanistan's government fell in August of 2021, they were some of the first people to step in. And they were coordinating with friends of ours, and I'm sure friends of many people in this room, who are retired CIA operatives and retired military personnel. And they were going in and helping to get the personnel who worked with the US military and their families out. During the Ukraine war, I've been involved with things since the Russian invasion in Ukraine. In the early days, I had an opportunity to make a group called Armada, the Armada Network. It was made up of a group of pastors that had organized a conversation, a communications channel, a support channel for congregations all over, different religions, all over the Ukraine during the Russian invasion and the annexation of Crimea in 2014. And we all remember at the beginning of the war, NATO didn't know what they were doing. I mean, no one had made commitments yet. You had big NGOs who were getting stuff together. But I'm going to tell you, because I was heavily involved in doing calls, that stuff was sitting on the border of Poland. And what they did is they took 10 men, and they're continuing to do that. They have 10 men who form a daisy chain and get things up to the front lines, help people out who are under risk. One of the biggest relationships in my life has been with my father. And I really learned a lot when my father passed away in 2019. He always told me, do what you say you're going to do, no matter how tired you are. Do what you committed to do, no matter how difficult it is. And so when my father, he built a large institution from ground zero to thousands of people. But when he died, people didn't send us letters about what he had built, about his job. They told us about what he did for them. And so some of the most amazing stories that we got in these letters, a young woman who was going to drop out of college, and she didn't have enough money. And he sat down with her, helped her fill the gap, and he said, let's build a 6-year plan for you. Nobody said you had to go to school in 4 years. We're going to build a 6-year plan. Another friend of mine was a journalism major. This is in the 80s. When she went off for her first internship, her professors would not recommend her because women, they can't be anchors, they can't be reporters. My dad stepped in, he got her the first internship at WSET in Lynchburg, Virginia. She ended up being a reporter there, and for the last 20 years, she has been an anchor for a major metropolitan news station. You have to ask yourself, how do you want to be remembered? What you build speaks to your impact in the world around you. How you react to success or failure says a lot about you. It's the legacy that you leave. Kindness, humility, generosity. And I'm going to finish with one additional story, because I think sometimes we do things and we don't realize the impact it has. At the beginning of the Ukraine war, one of the groups of people I worked with were a group of hedge fund guys and investors in pharmaceutical research. They brought some of the biggest drugs to market. It was headed by a man, the coalition that was brought together was headed by one of my donors. Millions of dollars raised, millions of pieces of equipment and things shipped into the Ukraine. And I was late for a meeting, and I said, well, I'm sorry I'm late, I was involved in this Afghan resettlement meeting. And so the donor pipes up and he goes, oh, Lisa, I have a group of Afghans living on my farm. I'm like, you do? He goes, yeah. In 1982, as a 4-year-old Russian Jewish immigrant to the United States, somebody did that for my family. So, of course I would do that. And I think to myself, do you think the people who took him in have any idea? This man built a company he's a billionaire. He has shipped so many drugs, created so many opportunities for rare disease drugs to be created and delivered to people who need them the most. He's impacted millions of people. He's helping people in the Ukraine. He's helping these Afghan refugees. And so as you all think, during this holiday season, I want you to appreciate that when you do things, when you're a mentor, when you combine ambition and direction and leadership and generosity and collaboration, you're linking arms with people. You're doing more than you realize that you've done, and take a moment to celebrate that. And one of my favorite movies is It's a Wonderful Life, and I always wonder, like George Bailey, do we really realize the impact of our intentional actions? I have a sneaky feeling the people that took in that man had no idea that they would create the domino effect to help millions of people at their time of need. So take a moment, realize that perhaps the people in this room have helped an angel earn its wings this season. Celebrate it. Maintain your commitment to networking, maintain your commitment to being relevant. Being a mentor, being a good leader, that's your guiding light to the path that you're leading that's going to help other people. And in so doing, each of you has already and will continue to change the world. So thank you.